you all very much for coming this afternoon. So our session is about driving recovery across key sectors, and it's great because we have quite a mix of sectors, from tobacco to telecoms to energy to real estate, legal, banking. Nigeria has gone through its challenges in the last couple of years, new government, new policies, devaluation, inflation, cash crisis, ESG. We've gone through so many things. And I think this afternoon, what we want the audience to know is that despite the challenges, we've seen opportunities. And your organizations have been able to drive recovery and growth. I'm going to start with Mr. Fatimileyin because I've had that name growing up. It's a household name. So I'm going to look at policies. I'm going to just ask you about policies, post-reform real estate policies. So for your organization, which specific fiscal or land administration reforms has been the biggest game changer for the real estate investment industry?
Well, land administration is always very critical to economic development, and legislations that surrounds it will determine how those resources are used. The most strategic legislation which can be regarded as a major policy statement regarding real estate is the Real Estate Development Bill that was passed in 2021, basically regulating the relationship within the provider of services within this industry. But unfortunately, the law has been there, but no framework has been put to ensuring that it's implemented. So basically, there is still the milieu of unpleasant situation within the practitioner of real estate practice in Nigeria. However, there are major shifts in major decisions that has been made within the industry. Part of it is the Renew Hope agenda that has an arm of building houses, 10,000 houses within the next 4 years. Not only that, also the Ministry of Finance also has set up a ₦1 trillion fund, of which the first tranche has just gone to 50 billion to subsidize purchasers of properties so that they can get mortgage on long-term risk at scale. So it's not 1, 2 mortgages that we see being offered by banks. So there is a strategic position to ensure that mortgage is produced, can be given at a large scale. So it's a major policy decision in real estate. Also, we have the Lagos State regulation that is trying to regulate the behavior within the market, which is being promulgated into law. Those are major decision taking. However, within this decision, they're just looking at the behavior of the people. What matters is planning. Most states has not been planned. Most capital cities don't have master plan. So they don't know, so that's why you have development going in the wrong direction, not regulated, that cannot be controlled. But if this towns, like other places, and cities and states are properly planned, you could put in place where everything will be, and then there will be a decisive and measured progress in orderly development within the city. When there are orderly development, what it does is that it increases value. It makes value accretion really, really visible to the investors, and can attract both local and foreign investors into this bid. So decision policies are made and are not followed up. And if they are not followed up, they are left hanging and nothing can be done about it.
Let me just ask you a follow-up question quickly, because I was here when the representative from the minister talked about funding they have available, and you just said that as well. And you said that people will have access to mortgage. But what is the interest rate? Can everyone afford the interest rate on this?
No, the intervention of MREF is giving mortgage at incredibly 12%.
Okay.
And that may not make it as affordable as we find in other countries where it is 5-6%.
Yeah.
But it's a major shift from a position of 23%, 30% to 4 mortgages. It's not possible. Nobody can fund mortgage at that rate.
Absolutely.
But at 12% and at scale, it's a major movement forward from what has ever been.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rube, let me come to you. VAT operates in a tightly regulated industry. And, there have been recent shifts in terms of excise tax regime, stricter advertising restriction, which, might impact what your business is doing. So how do you see that, and how do you balance being a profitable organization with all the policies surrounding your kind of business?
Thank you very much, and congratulations to Business Day for a marvelous event as well, I would say. Let me give you a quick context of BAT. So obviously it's a multinational company. We've been in Nigeria more than 100 years. In 2003, we established a state-of-the-art factory in Ibadan. We spent about $150 million, and throughout that time since then, we've spent another $35 million on maintenance. So we're very established in Nigeria and have a market-leading position. We also export to 13 markets, including the USA, which is a proud initiative, which we're very proud of. Now, as you said, we are in a very regulated environment, both from an excise perspective and marketing perspective, but it's the regulatory clarity that we always need and the consistency in policies. Previous government, we had the cash crunch, and then we had an excise shock, which was later thankfully reversed by the new government. But at the same time, we had a roadmap, which previously the government was trying to break. Now, the new government, to their credit, maintained that roadmap. It's a 3-year roadmap, which is moderate and predictable excise, allows us to plan and invest. That roadmap has come to an end. And now we go into a new roadmap from next year. So again, we rely on the government for moderate, predictable excise and fiscal strategy to enable the local industry to have a sustainable future. One other thing I would just say on regulation, because it's important as we're an exporter, the government also had an initiative of an export expansion grant previously to incentivize non-oil exporters. And that was critical because obviously non-oil exporters only represent 20%. Now BAT as a significant exporter, we export more than $100 million worth of proceeds which come back into the country every year, and we're consistently one of the top 10 exporters. The EEG, or the Export Expansion Grant, has always been very cumbersome because it relied on promissory notes, debt from the government. And since its inception, we have never received it, by the way. So it's imperative that in order to continue to encourage exporters, we move from promissory notes to export certificates, which can also be validated by the NEPC and the CBN and so forth. And that is highly important for us, those two parts of the regulation, fiscal clarity and also an immediate overhaul of the export expansion grant to facilitate the local legal sustainable industry.
Okay, so it looks as if you have your master plan sorted out to navigate that. So let me come to banking. Taj Bank, Mr. Hamid. So, I mean, there are a lot of regulatory policies within the banking industry, but let's look at scaling Islamic finance, right? So what kind of policies or regulatory reforms would help expand non-interest banking? Because we still have a lot of people that are underbanked in rural and peri-urban areas. So what kind of policies or regulatory reforms do you think must take place for this to be achieved?
Okay, thank you very much. In terms of regulation, I would say that we have a fairly developed regulatory environment. Not as advanced, that is in terms of non-interest banking, not as advanced as what you have, for instance, in Malaysia. But nevertheless, here in Nigeria, we also have a robust regulatory framework. And the regulatory framework is drawn from the Islamic Financial Standards Board. So I would say that the regulatory framework is quite robust. And it has given an opportunity to players to come into the market. When we came in, we were the second non-interest bank. And now we have about 5. And it is a success in the sector that has served as a big motivation for investors to look at non-interest banking as a profitable investment and to invest. For instance, in Taj Bank, when we started, we broke even in the first 6 months. And of course, we made profit in our first year. We've been consistently profitable. We've been recording triple-digit growth almost every year. So I would say I would attribute it to the regulatory framework that we have. However, there is a fundamental problem, and that problem has to do with liquidity management. If you look at the conventional banks, there are so many liquidity management instruments. You have the treasury bills, you have OMO, you have so many short-term liquid instruments that a conventional bank can place liquidity. But for non-interest banking, there is a dearth of instruments. So sometimes you find yourself with heaps of liquidity in your system, but there is nowhere to place it. So that is a major problem that I think the regulators have to work on, one. Secondly, it is the speed. In non-interest banking, whatever product you want to introduce, you have to take it to the Sharia board for approval. And they sit once a quarter. So for instance, if you establish the bank, you would have to wait for 3 months or 6 months before you get product approvals. Meanwhile, for conventional banks, as you open the bank today, your products are ready and you start running. So that is also a big challenge. So we need speed in terms of the frequency of meetings of the Sharia board, so that we'll have approvals as and when due. Secondly, the difficulty of issuing sukuks is also there. I've had some meetings with the Debt Management Office in Nigeria, and I asked them, why can't you introduce non-interest T-bills, sukuks often? Why can't you fund the capital budget through sukuk? I mean, it's easier because we've all seen the success of sukuk in Nigeria. When the federal government introduced the product, it was a bit controversial. But now, as you travel on Nigerian roads, You see Sukuk infrastructure, you see those routes, and that is transformative. And my argument is, why can't we fund the capital budget through Sukuk? And the answer is the time it takes for the Sharia board to grant approval for the Sukuk. And if they have to do that, there is no way they will meet up with the budget. So I think these are areas that we need regulation, the regulators to come in and fast track, so that we'll have a more robust and efficient industry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for educating us on that, because we wouldn't have thought so. So Olakule, let me come to you. We had an energy panel this morning, and there's been a lot of transactions in the last year and acquisitions. You know, it was even impressive to see everybody this morning, well, Nigerians. So for me, people still believe there's still little bits of bottleneck that is slowing down private investment. So what can be done in ensuring that that can be fixed in the incoming reform, so that we attract more private investments in your sector?
So thank you very much. I was going to say that it's good that you started with the money man before you went to me, because everything I say today would depend on him and also maybe the financial sector. But that's on the light side. So like I said, I run a company that is involved across the value chain of natural gas and power. Today, we provide energy that supports close to about 300 megawatts of power generation in Nigeria. We are setting up the first compressed natural gas system in Ghana today, in Tema. So we see it end to end, both in terms of gas processing, both in terms of pipeline, gas distribution, compressed natural gas distribution, gas trading, and the likes of it. And so the first thing I would say is, when I look at what sort of policy helps to incentivize private investment, the question I ask myself is, what are we trying to achieve? And this conference talks about a roadmap to recovery. So the question is, what's our destination? Where do we want to get to? If we look at the different numbers, what we're trying to achieve is to have some level of socioeconomic stability and improvement in our conditions. We've said that we want to become a $1 trillion economy by 2030, which means that we have to significantly leap the amount of GDP growth we have on an annual basis. All of this, to unlock all of this, at the center of all of this is energy. Energy is life. Energy is at the center of everything that we want to do. And so when we look at it, we dimension the challenges, right? Indeed, we've made significant progress when it comes to the upstream development. And I'm sure that the panel earlier today spoke to some of the initiatives within the last 1 year that will come in trying to unlock, resource development at the upstream level. We have a bias for natural gas, so we're excited. We're working in a number of the upstream players to unlock that sector. But there's one critical element that we need to fix that will drive investment, and that's the market. Because it doesn't matter how much production you do on the upstream. If you don't have effective market that can take it, you ultimately will struggle in terms of an efficient market environment. And so two primary things. Number one is to step up power generation significantly and try to debottleneck the challenges that you have around that power sector issues. And I tell you today, we supply gas to the likes of NDPAC. We see that the entire power sector today is enveloped under a 4 trillion naira debt. We are immersed in that debt. We are struggling to find a way to manage that. And so you don't expect private sector to make investments, where they cannot have assurance on revenue collection, right? And in terms of also cash flow management as well. The second thing is, you also want to drive policy towards expanding gas to industries, because that's the primary driver for industrialization. And so you want to get to a point where you move the market to a market-led approach. Today, we have so much interventions from the regulatory authorities around pricing, around the fiscals. And you realize that that doesn't provide enough policy sustainability to drive investment. So what you want to see, ultimately, and what we do a lot, is work with government agencies and stakeholders to help that transition ultimately to a market-led environment, which gives confidence for people to make investment. And of course, the last thing will be on the macroeconomics. We cannot divorce ourselves from the fact that we exist in an economy that ultimately what happens on the macro side affects on the micro side. And I thought the previous keynote speech did reference the fact that yes, we have some stability in terms of FX, and the likes of it, but we want to see a regime that gives confidence in terms of the macros, both in terms of foreign exchange, both in terms of being able to attract investment, foreign direct investment, FDIs into the space. And finally, we also want to see an environment that incentivizes private capital development. That's one area that is still a challenge here in Africa. We have so much, from what we estimate, private capital capacity, but that's not going into critical sectors that will drive industrialization and energy development. And so what we want to see ultimately is, in combination of DFIs and institutional investment, let's have policies that also drive private sector, private capital investment. US today, is essentially built on private capital and private equity. I don't think there's any reason why we can't achieve that in Nigeria. Technology is very important. We can't do anything without technology. We expect efficiency in technology. All that is driven by the fact that we have efficient markets. We want our effective market to grow from about 20% that it is today to at least 70%, which means that we are sure we can push in, energy development straight to market that can accommodate it. There are several other things, but these are my own few comments around it.
Thank you. There's a lot that still needs to be done, obviously, but we're moving there slowly. So let me come to Templars. We've heard from Taj about non-interest treasury bills. We've looked at the micro, macro. We've looked at all the taxes within the tobacco. We've looked at even the land and the master plan, the land laws, and what have you. So I can imagine you have a lot of clients that come to you across all sectors every day with different regulatory uncertainty, right? So I wanted to ask you, the CEOs that come to you on a daily basis, what's their biggest headache when it comes to regulatory uncertainty? What's their biggest headache?
I think it's a funny way to answer the question, but the biggest headache for people dealing with an economy like Nigeria is oftentimes regulatory uncertainty itself. And it varies from sector to sector. But I think oftentimes we look at things like regulatory cost, we look at inconsistency, changes, etc. Businesses have shown us that they are probably they're tolerant of taxes, they're tolerant of costs, but they want to know that there's consistency in the way government thinks, there's consistency in how policy is applied, there's the instability in terms of stability in terms of how policy is interpreted. So I can go from sector to sector and identify specific sorts of issues that people worry about, but it's more across the board how government thinks, how different agencies of government work together or work at cross purposes, and how these harm businesses. Now, but if you look at one particular theme that has been consistent across the board in Nigeria over the past few years, although things have gotten significantly better there, FX has been a particularly thorny issue. So things around liquidity, availability of FX, access to the FX market, clarity of rules. So even if I've seen reform take place, and the central bank governor of today has done marvelously well in clearing backlogs of demand. They've also introduced policies aimed at transparency in terms of bringing out demand and supply in sunshine and enabling market participants going to purchase and sell, and then also bringing exchange rate stability. So with all of that, there's still a few issues that create cautious anxiety, if you like. So things like, we have rules that say we are in a willing buyer, willing seller market. A lot of businesses in Nigeria and a lot of foreign investors coming into Nigeria spend a lot of time trying to get legal and regulatory advice as to what exactly is willing buyer, willing seller? Am I able to go to BAT, for example, and say you have surplus dollars? Can I trade my Naira with you? And there you meet some bottlenecks. So issues of that nature. There are issues also around our regulators, not necessarily concentrating on regulation, but coming under revenue pressure. So many Nigerian regulators now have sort of veered into the space where they almost see themselves as profit centers. And so the cost of regulation is massive. If you need certain approvals, the fee you pay does not represent the service that the regulator provides, but instead is often calculated by reference to the value of your transaction, which has absolutely nothing to do with the effort, the research, the manpower, etc., that the regulator deploys to regulating and approving what it is you've come for. And all of these add up to cost of doing business in Nigeria. They add up to issues around lack of competitiveness. They just create those sorts of anxiety that businesses don't like.
So let me ask you a follow-up question. If you have a client, how can the business leader better future-proof their contracts, their governance framework, just to be able to thrive in an environment where policies are changing? How can they future-proof themselves? How would you advise your clients,
I think that's a very good question, because sometimes when we talk about these challenges, we enumerate so many challenges that it then begins to create the wrong impression that this is a market in which people do not succeed. And we've seen examples at this stage today of very successful experiments in spite of these challenges. And so I think, and we're proud to say as a firm, we've participated in many of these successes. So in terms of trying to future-proof our clients, the one important thing to do, amongst other things, is you have to be proactive. And being proactive means you have to anticipate change and be ready as quickly as possible to respond to change. Yeah. And this includes constantly staying close to your advisors. So at Templars, for example, we provide certain services around legislative watch. So legislative watch means that for certain clients, we're embedded in lawmaking bodies, the National Assembly, state assemblies. We're embedded in regulatory agencies, trying to spot potential change and what those changes would mean for our clients, and notifying the clients by way of alerts, by way of updates, so that they are aware of these changes potentially coming down the pipe and begin to prepare themselves for the possibility that a change will materialize. Okay. And more important also, begin to engage in things like policy advocacy, trying to form policy, trying to shape how legislation turns out. And in this sort of venture, you find that collaboration amongst businesses, things like chambers of commerce. In the oil and gas industry, we have what we call the Oil Producers Trade section of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce. And that's a very active advocacy group that speaks the mind of the market, that is very proactive in engaging with regulators, engaging with legislatures to ensure that the market is not surprised by policy changes and regulatory changes. Those happen sometimes, yeah, but those are the sorts of things you do. Then if you come to contracts specifically, we are very, very agile and active in how we look at contracts. We look at the past. We look at things like disputes we've seen in the past, and we ensure that in drafting contracts, those contracts have adaptive clauses that look at things like, if there's a change in law, what would the consequence be? Are you able to review your contracts if certain triggers happen? Do you have price adjustment mechanisms and those sorts of things? So these are things you ensure that you have in your contracts. And then also, internally, businesses, conduct things like trainings that enable them to adapt as things change.
Thank you. So it's a lot in terms of advocacy, being ahead of your game, knowing the policies so you just don't wake up overnight and things happen. He touched on FX volatility. So, Yahoop, how does this, has your localization, what you're doing, has it helped in your, because you're, again, import dependence. So how does FX affect you?
So historically, we've always been big on exports. So that export arm has hedged against the currency. So we've been privileged from that perspective. And that's why we guard it and we ensure that made in Nigeria products are top quality, etc. And that's why we also get to export to the US. I think if I look at all of the turmoil that happened, and I always go back to the cash crunch, because the cash crunch was for us the beginning of the biggest, most difficult moments, probably in Nigeria. You then had the government coming in making the overdue bold moves, that were necessary for the longevity of the economy. So yes, the liberalization of the FX, and we didn't know where it was going to end. So all we could do was, we had a long-term view. We had the ability, the reliance on the exports, as I said, which acted as a hedge, and we just had to continue to maintain our objectives and our approach of investment in people, in our ESG also, because in our factories we've moved away from diesel to compressed natural gas. We've added solar, etc. We've continued to invest in training and development across ESG and all the rest of it. Now we're seeing the green shoots. So now we're seeing a stability in FX. We're seeing a gradual reduction in inflation, and of course, the oil price or the fuel is also stabilizing. But there was a long time that I used to have to spend 50% of my time on managing the business and 50% explaining to head office what's happening, obviously. So that's the nature of multinationals, of course. Now we're out of that phase. And as I say, I think Nigeria demographically, it was always a big prize. So I think the companies that are established and that stay the course, just like the government, have to see that through. And it's about working on I just go back to regulation, working with government on regulation that's in line with the economic realities of Nigeria, making sure that the regulation is well implemented and also in line with the economic recovery. So from that perspective, we're very optimistic now on Nigeria.
Great.
And of course, plan to be here for a long, long time.
Thanks. So, Mr. Hamid Joda, let me come back to you. You've talked about your policies, and you've talked about the expansion of, Sharia banks from 2 to now 5. So which sectors are you really focusing on, like agriculture, halal infrastructure, SMEs? What is really demanding Sharia compliant capital? And what gives you an edge over conventional banks?
Okay, thank you very much. So, for non-interest banks, there are no-go areas. For instance, we don't touch arms and ammunition, betting and gambling, and so on and so forth. So we don't touch those areas. We don't do business in those areas. But other than that, the space is wide open for us to operate. When we launched our first sukuk, because we are the first bank in Nigeria to launch a private sector sukuk, so we launched a sukuk to boost our capital. When we did that, we came up with a long-term instrument. The problem we have in Nigeria today is generally banks are unable to do long-term investments. Why? Because of tenor matching. Most of the funds you have in the banking system are short-tenured funds. And you can't take short-tenured funds into long-tenured investments. So we said, let's do a sukuk, minimum 5-year tenure. And it was a very successful issuance. It was 116% oversubscribed. What did we do with that money? We financed industries. There is an industry, a detergent industry we finance here in Lekki in Lagos. Turned out very well. There is a fertilizer company we financed in Kogi State. Turned out very well. Rice mills. That kind of investment that unlocks growth, creates jobs, propels economic development. That is what we did. And now we are on our second series, and we've not finished. We've not, we are rounding up by next week, but we are more than 100% oversubscribed. And that money too, we are tying it to long-term investments, because we've seen the benefit in funding long-term investments. And so that is the edge that we have, because we are able to float an instrument that is long-tenured, has a long tenure, and we're able to put it in high-impact industries that creates jobs and unlocks economic development. So that is one strong feature that distinguishes us and gives us leverage. Secondly, generally banks don't share risk. So when you come, you apply for a facility, you get it, a loan, and then you have a tenure within which you are expected to pay. But the non-interest bank will tell you that I'm ready to share the risk or share the return. Why not? Why can't we share the risk or share the return? Why can't we partner? Why can't I come in as a venture capitalist, as an equity holder in the business? Let's do it together. We win together or we lose together. Why not? So that is also an advantage that a non-interest bank has, and that is what we are offering to the market in addition to a lot of products, and that is two key distinguishing factors that we have.
Thanks. Thank you for that. Thank you. Interesting. Mr. Fatmilehin, let me come back to you. So we know the need, for the master plan. We know that, people need homes to live in. But we also know what's happening to talent in our country. And it's not just in real estate. I think it's across all industries. So how are you nurturing a new generation of professionals who will be able to drive a world-class real estate advisory and project management? How are you doing that?
Even the Minister of Health at the time says the doctors can go, we will train another one. But it's not normally like that. But we recognize this in our company that we need these young talents to be able to produce good products that will be usable by our client. So what we resort to is that what is pushing these young ones away is not only money. They want an environment where they can work and be appreciated, and where they can train. So we set up good training for them. So when they encounter their counterparts elsewhere in the world, they discover they are not losing at all. But we also try as much as possible to look at their income to make it that it is relatively comparable to what they will get. Even if they won't get as much as those people that went abroad, we also have a way of working together with them to see that the future is brighter. And because, in fact, almost every week, you find one of kind of training or the other going on in the place. It means that a young person who is just coming in now because of the training and the skill he has acquired, he can do much more than what he would have been able to do 2 years ago. So he creates more value, so he can be paid more. So keeping talent is difficult, truly difficult, because the attraction elsewhere is so. I've had occasionally see some people that we have just trained, and they go, and you felt like weeping because they get to the other end, they don't really get what they wanted to get. Some had come back. So I think the way around it is that the country must be ready to work with the young ones. Part of some of the things that takes them away is the ability that, look, I'm working here, his counterpart that goes abroad can have his own house within the first 2 years he gets there. So that's what we are technical partner to the MREF, the mortgage fund that has been created. Part of what it is that if they can get such facility here, it will help them to stay, because they'll be able to create the future they are looking forward to. So those are the issues we can put together: training, encouragement, and the facility around there.
Thank
that
you.
Can make them to stay.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I think we all have those challenges with retaining talent. So, Olakule, this will come to you. So, I've talked about one of the challenges, retaining talent. How are you geared up? Because everywhere you go here, everywhere you go now, cleaner, energy source, what kind of energy? How is that transition? How are you positioning yourself to balance fossil fuel realities with the shift to cleaner, more diversified energy resource? Because it's something we're all saying we're going to reach net zero, carbon credit. They're talking about it. Is it just people are talking, or are they really gearing? So is your company gearing up to this? I think the question was asked this morning as well.
So that's a very interesting question, right? And I'll try to simplify it from the way we see it. The first thing is that indeed there's an energy transition that's underway, right, internationally, driven by real scientific verification of the need for us to reduce our impact, our footprint on the environment. But of course, the consensus is that somehow technology has to match that transition. We're at the point today where most developed nations are still trying to create the technology that would optimize and unlock baseload energy from renewable energy, which is what we are touting as the future of energy. And so when we look at it in an African context, the first thing we ask ourselves is that, look, we are so blessed in resources here in Africa, especially in Nigeria, right? Huge natural gas resources, huge resources on the mineral side. And so the first question is that if you have such an economy that is huge in resource, but you have very limited economic growth, then how do you translate that resource very quickly in an efficient way, in a way that also minimizes your impact, your carbon footprint on the environment, because it's very, very important, and get those resources ultimately down to producing energy. But we also have to admit that while we've also said that we cannot switch off the light bulb before the candles go off, we also have to start adopting an energy mix. So let's get ready for the future of energy, which means that there are developments today that are improving renewable energy. There are developments today that are improving efficiency around grid management. Mm-hmm. There are technologies today that are improving even reducing the carbon emissions from your production process. So we have to become, we cannot sit down in the world where we say, look, we have natural gas, that's how we're going to develop, or we have crude. We have to get into that future to say, look, yes, we'll develop our resources efficiently, but we'll also try to leapfrog, right, the future of energy, such that if we can change our consumption pattern, change the way we use technology, we can start incorporating those renewable energy into our mix. It might not provide stable supply of energy, but at least if we can create some efficiency in how we do our dispatch in our grid, we can be able to get those renewable energy to the grid and then use natural gas or etc. to provide baseload support for it. So summary is that we must engage all our resources. There must be energy mix because financing is very key as well. So you expect that a lot today financing are not excitedly available for fossil fuel projects. So you must come to a position where even if you are doing a fossil fuel project, you do it in a way that is so efficient that you can show that, look, I'm using the technology to reduce carbon. And I also have a mix of renewable energy in my portfolio that ultimately helps me clean up my entire emissions.
Great. So following up on that, and this is my last question, and I'm going to ask each panelist one last question because of time. Following up on what Olakunle just said, so when a lot of people are ESG, but they don't really know how or what to maneuver. So Mr. Chike, it's one of the things you advise your clients, right, on ESG, right, in 10+. Are clients really going the full hog, or is just lip service? And what would you advise any of your clients right now? Because I'm aware that even when they're going for transactions, ESG is a very significant aspect. So what is one advice, or maybe not more than one, what is your advice to client, whether they've done it, whether they haven't done it, whether they're about to do it, what is that advice you need to tell them?
The thing with ESG is there are different imperatives that drive ESG. And so even if it wasn't something you did from a place of commitment, from a place of appreciating that these are things that we need to start adopting for sustainability and etc., etc. One of the most important and ultimately inevitable drivers will actually be the point around funding. And Kule makes the point about a lot of financiers out there now are reticent about fossil fuels and therefore are either scaling back or have completely left the financing on fossil fuels. Okay. So even if you weren't doing it for the future or for the environment, it is something that is critically important in terms of access to finance. So sometimes you find you're looking to raise debt and there are specific funds out there who will be willing to fund a green bond, for example, a green project, and therefore that imperative means that you either go that route completely or you build in an element of that in your transaction. So if there's no other reason, think about it from a survival perspective and from the perspective that over time, access to financing and other benefits in the market will be very dependent upon your plugging into the environment, sustainability, social impact, and those sorts of governance issues.
Thank you. So, Mr. Fatimileyin, how are you gearing up in housing to be sustainable in terms of you might have access to funds to build? How do you ensure that your housing is for the sustainable future?
Sustainability is key to the world today. We all know that if we are not careful, what is going to happen is that the entire race will be extinct in a few years from now. So we have to build everything sustainably. Houses have to be built sustainably. Even the sustainability of the pocket as well, like you mentioned. We hope that government will take deliberate actions and make sure that things work well in the country. like I mentioned earlier, most towns are not planned. If you are not planned, in the SDG 11, is sustainable housing that is inclusive and that eliminates slums. But instead of that happening in Nigeria, we are multiplying slums. 20 years ago, there were recognized about 20 to 30 slums in Lagos. Over the years, they have grown to over 100. So it's increasing instead of decreasing. So government has to take specific action. Plan city well. The new city, the new capital they are creating, let them plan it well. When they plan it, there will be deliberate action to create estates and development that can be sustainable, that can become a bastion or place where people can live in, where people can reside and live in sustainably. And when we do our construction, we must take into consideration the local consideration. Okay. If you go to, for instance, Bauchi and build a house as if you are in Lagos, and you want to air condition it, during dry season, it will not be possible because the temperature will be so high. So the construction, the design and construction must be quite different from what happens everywhere. So all this code we can develop all over the country and implement. When you implement them well, what will happen is that we'll have a better environment to live, environmental-ish situation. So for a sustainability point of view, for Nigeria, we need a total approach to it, to development, to even titling. If we title our land, it will attract more money. It can attract financing. Today, many people build houses halfway, but because they don't have title, they can't turn to the bank and borrow that 2 million naira to complete the house. So those are all connected. And when the connections are put in place, what we'll have is a better environment and better situation, and actually a sustainable environment to live in. Devoid of slum and understandably good for all our people. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Taj Bank, my final question for you as well is, what is one major misconception that the media or the public feel about Sharia banking and that you want to correct here today? No, it's Taj.
That's a tough question. Well, I think if you remember when the regulatory framework was introduced, I mean, there was a lot of uproar, a lot of resistance. People thought it was, a bank that would promote a religion and what have you. And in fact, I remember at that time, the central bank governor, Sanusi, at that time, he had to go to the National Assembly to clarify that there were so many misconceptions and that they should give it a chance. So the most fundamental thing is, non-interest banking is for everyone. If you come to Taj Bank today, I mean, our recruitment process, whatever we do, has nothing to do with where you come from or your religious bias. Everyone is invited. If you look at our customer base, most of our customers are not even Muslims. Most of our customers are not even Muslims. Most of the customers we finance are not even Muslims. So the model is for everyone. The model is for development. It's for progress. It's for unlocking opportunities for business people. It's for support. These are the messages that I take to everywhere and to all the forums that I find myself. And that is what I want the media to project. Everyone is invited, regardless of religion, regardless of tribe, regardless of all misconceptions. It's, as I said, it's a model that is in tune with progress and development, and it's the best model for Nigeria.
Thank you. So let me come to you, Yarub. So everyone else has spoken about sustainability. And I'd like to know, because we have a very vocal youth in Nigeria, how are you aligning, because you have to move towards sustainability, right? Everyone has to. How are you aligning your product portfolio and messaging to balance the public health concerns with where you're supposed to get to?
It's a great question and very of the moment. So the tobacco industry as a whole globally is going through tremendous transformation. We as BAT want to move towards what we call a smokeless world. So what does that mean? The harms associated with cigarettes and tobacco are very well known. But now, over the past decade or so, societal needs and expectations have changed dramatically. More into health, more into reduction and impact on the environment. And technology is now at a stage which has enabled us to develop what we call new category products. So these new category products, for example, vaping, oral nicotine, tobacco-heated products, are scientifically proven to be less harmful. Not risk-free, but the majority of toxins and harm from tobacco and cigarettes come from combustion. When you burn it, it releases toxins. These are smokeless products. So the idea is, for BAT, we want more than 50% of our revenue globally by 2035 to come from these new categories. These new categories aren't present legally in Nigeria at the moment. They're illicit and suitcase jobs and what have you. So what we want, we're working right now with government and with regulators to put in the correct regulation that will facilitate the launch of these new categories, and we'll be very excited to bring these to market.
Thank you. Thank you. Olakunle, actually, I'm going to ask everybody this question, but you have to answer me in 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Are we in agreement? So I'm going to start with Olakunle. You meet the finance minister today. What is your wish for him? What do you wish from him? 30 seconds.
Okay, so, I mean, what 30 seconds. I think
30 seconds.
Unlock funding from infrastructure projects, right? Using both private capital and also supporting institutional investors like pension funds and the likes of it. So work on a policy that enables...
Thank you. 30 seconds. What's your wish for the finance minister? 30 seconds. He's in an elevator and he's going to come down on the... Okay, Mr. Fatimilan, you can go.
I will ask him to increase the 1 trillion naira mortgage fund, probably to 5 trillion, so that it will satisfy the market.
Thank you.
Okay, I think two things I'll ask the minister. One is, with all of these reforms in place now, how do you implement? Second is data. There's a lot of confusing, contradicting data coming from the Ministry of Finance, from the CBN, from the Bureau of Statistics, and we hear clients out there getting confused and questioning things around government data, rebasing, and those sorts of stuff. So consistency in that department.
Thank you. Yahoo?
A balanced fiscal a balanced fiscal reform in terms of the next roadmap, also the immediate overhaul of the export expansion grant.
Thank you. Taj Bank. No interest rates on treasury bills.
Okay, I would say promote, I think he's doing a good job, but I think we need to promote fiscal discipline. And Sukuk promotes fiscal discipline because when the fund is raised, it is ring-fenced. So you can't raise Sukuk for a hospital and then build a road. No, you can't do that. So unlike other instruments out there. So let him focus on doing more Sukuks for infrastructure development.
Thank you all so much. Can we give them a round of applause? I think what this session has indicated is, despite the challenges we face in Nigeria, companies are still able to navigate. We had advisors from Templars who is able to guide. They're also very forward-looking in terms of making sure things will work well for the organization. So I think they deserve a round of applause. I have learned quite a bit today. And thank you so much. Thank you, and thanks to Business Day, and congratulations again.